Another thing I don't like is, and this really isn't a fall camp thing, but my goodness, the thinness at wide receiver. I tweeted very strongly about this last week. Again, if you're new here, you can find me on Twitter. Engage with me. Not just Notre Dame fans. Feel free to come troll Notre Dame on my Twitter as well. But the thinness at wide receiver, just criminal. Notre Dame is a program that has boasted competing against the best, graduating champions. The goal has always been to compete for championships. And leaving the wide receiver position this thin is just not something that a championship team does, at least in my estimation. I mean, feel free to disagree with that, but what is it? They're down to 5 scholarship receivers that are healthy, I think, and 7 total. Maybe it is. I could have those numbers off. The bottom line is this, okay? I've talked a lot about how the difference between a team like, Clemson, Alabama, Ohio State that competes every single year for the most part, and Notre Dame, who's there once in a while, gets there, doesn't really always look like they belong. And I don't mean to start that argument of negativity necessarily, but, a team like those guys, the upper echelon versus Notre Dame is depth. I mean, you saw it when Notre Dame played Clemson back in the Cotton Bowl. Julian Love went down, and all of a sudden Notre Dame doesn't have a cornerback that can defend a Clemson receiver. Clemson tacks on 2 cheap touchdowns in the last couple minutes of the second quarter, and the game was over after that. Whereas if you have Julian Love out there, maybe they get 1, maybe they kick a field goal, and that game's completely different going into halftime. Not talking about Notre Dame and their past struggles, or not trying to make any of those types of arguments necessarily. The argument here is you've got to build depth. You've got to have guys that you can plug in, and the drop-off, maybe I'm not saying there's never any drop-off. I'm saying you've got to have guys that you plug in, and maybe you scheme your defense a little bit differently because they're in, but the drop-off isn't as significant as it is. And, maybe Lorenzo Styles and Tobias Merriweather and Jaden Thomas and those guys that are going to play are good enough that you're not going to be talking about this. But for right now, it's just tough for me to see, how Notre Dame goes out, competes, and wins games at Ohio State, for instance, without some depth at obviously the wide receiver position, other positions as well. But we're talking about how the wide receiver position is just so criminally thin. I don't get it. And there's shared blame here. A lot of it falls on the last regime. Some of it falls on the current regime because there's certainly some people left over from the last regime. Some of it was, Notre Dame, was thinking, we got Avery Davis coming back. We got enough guys. We got good tight ends. We won't take someone in the transfer portal. Or didn't take someone in the transfer portal, or didn't cast a wide enough net to get someone in the transfer portal. But this wide receiver position thing, man, it tops the list of anxieties for me as a Notre Dame fan. Because, let's face it, wide receiver is a position you're going to lose somebody at some point. For some stretch of a game, you're going to lose guys to injury because that's the nature of football. You're going to lose a guy that twists a knee, twists an ankle, isn't 100%. And now you've really hamstrung yourself if you don't have a passing game that is going to be respectable because you're playing young, inexperienced guys. I'll stop there.